I knew something was wrong the moment I stepped outside and saw my ice scraper was gone. The February morning in Naperville, Illinois, hit me like a slap to the face. -5 degrees, wind howling through the bare trees lining Meadowbrook Circle, and my Honda Civic wearing a thick coat of ice that looked like it had been painted on with a cement trowel. I'd parked in my driveway like I did every single night, left my ice scraper on the passenger seat like always. Except last night, I'd been too exhausted after my shift and left it on my windshield. Stupid mistake, but I was running on fumes after pulling a double at Northwestern Medicine Delner Hospital. Now it was gone. I stood there in my scrubs, breath making little clouds in the freezing air, staring at the empty spot where my scraper should have been. My hospital identification badge bounced against my chest as I leaned forward, squinting at the windshield like maybe the scraper would materialize if I looked hard enough. It didn't. Are you kidding me right now? I muttered, checking the ground around my car. Nothing. Not under the car, not in the bushes, nowhere. I pulled out my phone to check the time. 6:45 in the morning. My shift started at 7:30, and it was a 20-minute drive on a good day. With this ice, I was looking at 30 minutes minimum, assuming I could even get the ice off my car. I had exactly 15 minutes to figure this out. That's when I heard her voice. "Good morning, Harrison." I turned to see Brenda Cunningham Speed walking down the sidewalk toward me, her puffy pink coat making her look like a deranged marshmallow. She was clutching her ever-present clipboard to her chest like it was the Holy Grail. Brenda had been the president of the Meadowbrook Circle Homeowners Association for the past 6 years, and in that time, she'd made it her personal mission to make everyone's life as miserable as possible. "Morning, Brenda," I said, trying to keep the irritation out of my voice. I didn't have time for whatever nonsense she was about to unload on me. "I need to speak with you about your mailbox," she said, stopping about 3 feet away from me. Her breath came out in quick puffs, and her face was already red from either the cold or the indignation she seemed to carry with her everywhere. "The paint is chipping, and according to Article 7, Section 3 of the HOA bylaws, all mailboxes must maintain a pristine appearance." "Brenda, I really don't have time right now. I need to get to work and someone stole my ice scraper." Her eyes went wide for just a second, then narrowed. "Stole? That's a serious accusation. Are you sure you didn't just misplace it? I left it on my windshield last night. Now it's gone." "So yeah, I'm pretty sure someone took it." "Well, I haven't seen anything," she said quickly, too quickly. "But about your mailbox, I really must insist that you address this issue within the next 7 days or I'll have no choice but to issue a fine." "Fine. Great. Can this wait until I'm not about to be late for work?" "The HOA doesn't operate on your schedule, Harrison. We have rules for a reason." I bit back the response I wanted to give her and turned back to my car. I'd have to use my credit card to scrape the ice off. It would probably damage the card, but I didn't have another option. I pulled my wallet out and grabbed my old Visa that I barely used anymore. "I'll take care of the mailbox this weekend," I said over my shoulder, starting to work on the driver's side window. The ice was thick and stubborn, and my credit card wasn't making much progress. "See that you do," Brenda said. I heard her footsteps crunching away on the frozen ground and I let out a long breath. 20 minutes later, I was finally on the road, my hands numb and my credit card destroyed. I'd managed to clear enough ice to see out the windows, but my car looked like something from a disaster movie. I was going to be late, and my supervisor was going to give me that disappointed look that made me feel like I was 12 years old again. The day didn't get better. I worked in the emergency department as a nurse, and Mondays were always chaos, but that particular Monday seemed determined to set a new record. We had 3 car accidents come in before noon, a kitchen fire victim, 2 heart attacks, and a kid who'd stuck a bead so far up his nose that we needed an ENT consult. By the time my shift ended at 7:30 that evening, I was ready to collapse. I drove home in the dark, the roads slightly better but still treacherous. All I wanted was to eat something hot, take a shower, and sleep for about 12 hours. Instead, when I pulled into my driveway, I found a bright orange notice taped to my front door. "You have got to be joking," I said, ripping the notice down. It was from the HOA. According to the official-looking document complete with Brenda's looping signature at the bottom, I was being fined $200 for improper snow removal from driveway and walkway. The notice claimed that I had violated Article 12, Section 8, which required all homeowners to clear their driveways and walkways within 24 hours of snowfall. The last snow had fallen 3 days ago. I'd shoveled my driveway and walkway that same evening. My property was clear. I pulled out my phone and took pictures of my driveway and walkway, both of which were completely clear of snow. Then I took a picture of the notice. I was too tired to deal with this tonight, but tomorrow, Brenda and I were going to have a conversation. Inside, I microwaved some leftover pasta and sat at my kitchen table, scrolling through my phone while I ate. I'd moved to Naperville 2 years ago after getting the job at Northwestern Medicine. The house was small but perfect for me, a 2-bedroom ranch with a decent backyard and a quiet neighborhood. At least, it had seemed quiet when I'd first moved in. That was before I'd really understood what having an HOA meant, and before I'd experienced the full force of Brenda Cunningham's particular brand of tyranny. My phone buzzed with a text from my neighbor, Frank Morrison, who lived 2 houses down. "Did you get hit with a bogus fine too?" The message read, "Yep, snow removal. Even though I shoveled days ago, same here. She's targeting everyone on the street. I think she's trying to pad the HOA budget." I frowned at my phone. "That's not legal, is it?" "Probably not, but who has the time or money to fight it?" He had a point. Most people would just pay the fine rather than deal with the hassle of challenging it. Which was probably exactly what Brenda was counting on. I finished my pasta and headed for the shower, but I couldn't stop thinking about my missing ice scraper. It was a stupid thing to fixate on, but it bothered me. Who steals an ice scraper? And more importantly, why? The next morning I got up early and went outside to check my car again. Still no ice scraper. But as I stood there in the pre-dawn darkness, I noticed something interesting. There were footprints in the frost on my driveway. Small footprints, like someone wearing women's size 7 or 8 shoes, leading from the sidewalk to my car and then back to the sidewalk. They headed in the direction of Brenda's house. I followed them with my eyes, watching as they crossed 3 lawns and disappeared into Brenda's perfectly manicured driveway. Her house was a white colonial with black shutters, and every single detail was immaculate. The bushes were trimmed into perfect spheres, the lawn was professionally maintained, and even in winter, her property looked like something from a magazine. I pulled out my phone and took pictures of the footprints, making sure to capture the path they took. I wasn't sure what I was going to do with the evidence yet, but I had a feeling it might come in handy. Work was slightly less chaotic that day, which gave me time to think. During my lunch break, I called the HOA's management company, a place called Premier Community Management that handled the day-to-day operations for Meadowbrook Circle. I explained the situation with the fine, sent them the pictures of my clear driveway, and requested that the fine be removed from my account. The woman on the phone, who identified herself as Nancy, was sympathetic, but not particularly helpful. "I see the fine here in our system," she said. It was issued by the HOA president, Brenda Cunningham. To dispute it, you'll need to submit a formal written complaint which will be reviewed at the next board meeting. When's the next board meeting? Let me check. Looks like it's scheduled for 3 weeks from now. 3 weeks? Are you serious? I'm sorry, but that's the policy. The board meets on the third Thursday of every month. And what happens if I don't pay the fine by then? According to the bylaws, unpaid fines accrue interest at a rate of 10% per month, and after 90 days, the HOA can place a lien on your property. I closed my eyes and counted to 10. Fine. I'll submit a written complaint. Where do I send it? She gave me an email address and a physical mailing address, and I hung up feeling more frustrated than before. This was exactly what Brenda wanted. She knew most people wouldn't bother jumping through all these hoops. They'd just pay the fine and move on. But I wasn't most people. I'd worked too hard for this house, and I wasn't going to let some power-hungry HOA president shake me down for money I didn't owe. That evening, I drafted my formal complaint. I kept it professional and factual, attached the photos of my clear driveway, and sent it off to Premier Community Management. Then I copied Brenda on the email, just so she'd know I wasn't going to roll over. Her response came less than an hour later. Mr. Abbott, I stand by my assessment of your property. The fine will remain in effect unless you can prove that the snow removal was completed within the required time frame. Regards, Brenda Cunningham, HOA President. I stared at the email for a long moment, then typed back. Miss Cunningham, the photos clearly show that my property is in compliance. Additionally, I'd like to discuss the matter of my missing ice scraper. I have reason to believe someone in the neighborhood took it from my windshield 2 nights ago. If you have any information about this, please let me know. I hit send before I could second-guess myself. She didn't respond. The week passed in a blur of work and sleep. I bought a new ice scraper from Walmart, along with a cheap security camera that I mounted above my garage door. If someone was messing with my property, I wanted evidence. The camera wasn't fancy, but it had motion detection and recorded to a cloud server, which was good enough for my purposes. On Saturday morning, I finally had a day off. I slept in until 9, made myself a proper breakfast, and then headed outside to deal with my mailbox. I'd stopped at Home Depot the day before and picked up some paint that matched the original color. The mailbox didn't really need painting. The chipping was minimal and barely noticeable, but I wasn't going to give Brenda another excuse to fine me. I was halfway through painting when Frank Morrison walked over, hands shoved deep in his coat pockets. Looking good, he said, nodding at the mailbox. Yeah, well, can't risk another fine. I hear you. She hit me with another one yesterday. Apparently my trash cans were visible from the street for more than 30 minutes after pickup. Are you serious? Dead serious. $200. I shook my head. This is getting out of control. Someone needs to stop her. Good luck with that. She's got the rest of the board in her pocket. Her sister Janet is the treasurer and her husband's cousin Doug is the secretary. It's a family operation. That can't be legal, Frank shrugged. Probably not, but again, who's going to challenge it? Most people just want to live their lives. We talked for a few more minutes before Frank headed back to his house. I finished painting the mailbox and stood back to admire my work. It looked exactly the same as it had before, which I supposed was the point. As I was cleaning up, my phone buzzed with an alert from the security camera app. I pulled it up and saw that motion had been detected in my driveway. I switched to the live view and felt my blood pressure spike. Brenda Cunningham was standing in my driveway, taking pictures of something with her phone. I dropped the paintbrush and walked around the side of my house. Sure enough, there she was, crouched down near the base of my mailbox post. "Can I help you with something, Brenda?" I called out. She jumped, nearly dropping her phone, and whirled around to face me. Her face went through several interesting color changes before settling on an indignant red. "I'm conducting an inspection," she said, lifting her chin. "As HOA president, I have the right to inspect all properties for compliance. An inspection requires 24 hours notice, according to the bylaws," I said. I'd spent my lunch breaks that week reading through the entire HOA handbook, all 73 pages of it. You can't just show up on someone's property unannounced. I don't need notice to inspect common areas. My driveway isn't a common area, it's my property. The mailbox is considered part of the common architectural standards, which means you still need to give notice, and you need to be accompanied by at least one other board member during any inspection. I crossed my arms. So unless Janet or Doug is hiding in those bushes, this inspection isn't valid. Brenda's mouth opened and closed a few times. Then she said, "I'll be back tomorrow with the secretary to conduct a proper inspection." "Great, I'll be here. Make sure you give me written notice first." She turned on her heel and marched off, her pink coat flapping behind her. I watched her go, feeling a small sense of satisfaction. It wasn't much, but it was something. That evening, I settled onto my couch with a beer and pulled up the security camera footage from earlier in the day. I wanted to see exactly what Brenda had been photographing. The video quality wasn't great, but it was clear enough. She'd been taking pictures of the base of my mailbox post, specifically the small gap between the post and the concrete it was set in. I went outside with a flashlight to check. Sure enough, there was a tiny gap, maybe a quarter-inch wide, where the post met the concrete. It was barely noticeable and certainly not a structural issue. But apparently, it was enough for Brenda to consider it a violation. I took my own photos of the gap, then went back inside and started researching mailbox installation standards. After an hour of reading through building codes and HOA regulations, I was confident that my mailbox was perfectly fine. The gap was normal settling that occurred in every installation, and it didn't affect the stability or appearance of the mailbox. I added this information to my growing file of documentation. If Brenda wanted a war, I'd give her one, but I'd fight it with facts and evidence. Sunday morning arrived with another bitter cold front. I was making coffee when my phone buzzed with a notification from the security camera. I pulled up the app and froze. Someone was in my driveway again. But this time, it wasn't Brenda. It was a woman I didn't recognize, wearing a dark coat and a winter hat pulled low over her face. She was bent over, placing something on my windshield. I watched as she straightened up, looked around nervously, and then hurried away. I grabbed my coat and rushed outside, but by the time I got there, she was gone. On my windshield, held down by the wiper blade, was my ice scraper. My heart started pounding as I picked it up. It was definitely mine. I recognized the small crack in the handle and the worn grip. But there was something else. Attached to the scraper with a rubber band was my hospital identification badge. I felt the blood drain from my face. I'd lost that badge 2 months ago and had to get a replacement. I'd assumed it had fallen off somewhere at the hospital, but apparently not. Apparently, it had been on my ice scraper, and I hadn't noticed because I'd been too tired and rushed that morning, which meant whoever took my ice scraper had seen my hospital ID. Had known I worked at Northwestern Medicine. Had known my full name, Harrison Abbott, and my position as an emergency department nurse. And now they'd returned it in the middle of the night, like they were trying to make the whole thing go away. I went back inside and immediately pulled up the security camera footage. I rewound to the beginning of the motion detection and watched carefully. The woman approached from the street, walking quickly with her head down. The camera angle and the early morning darkness made it hard to see her face, but I could make out some details. She was short, maybe 5'3" or 4", with a slight build. The coat looked expensive and her boots were definitely designer, the kind with fur trim and distinctive buckles. I'd seen those boots before. Brenda wore them almost every day, but the person in the video wasn't Brenda. She was too short, and her build was different. I rewound and watched again, pausing on the best frame I could find. The woman's hands were visible as she placed the scraper on my windshield, and I could see rings. Multiple rings, including a large one on her right hand that caught the light from the street lamp. I grabbed my laptop and pulled up the HOA website. There were photos of the board members on the About Us page. I clicked through until I found a picture of Janet Cunningham, the treasurer and Brenda's sister. She was wearing the same rings in her official board photo. "Gotcha," I muttered. "But why would Janet return my ice scraper? And why in the middle of the night?" The more I thought about it, the more pieces started falling into place. Brenda had taken the scraper, probably thinking it was just a random ice scraper left on someone's car. Maybe she'd been walking her dog or doing one of her neighborhood inspections and had taken it on impulse. Then she discovered the hospital ID attached to it and panicked. Taking someone's personal property was one thing. Taking something with a hospital identification badge attached to it was evidence of theft, and stealing from a healthcare worker was not a good look. Especially if that healthcare worker decided to file a police report. So she'd sent Janet to return it, probably hoping I wouldn't notice and the whole thing would blow over. I saved the video footage to 3 different locations: my computer, the cloud, and a USB drive. Then I called the non-emergency police line. The dispatcher who answered sounded bored until I mentioned the hospital ID. "You're saying someone stole your hospital identification badge. They stole my ice scraper, which had my badge attached to it. Then they returned both items overnight, but the whole thing is on my security camera." "And you work at Northwestern Medicine?" "Yes, in the emergency department." The dispatcher's tone changed immediately. "Sir, theft of hospital credentials is a serious matter. It's a potential security risk. I'm going to send an officer to take your statement." 20 minutes later, Officer David Park was sitting at my kitchen table, reviewing the security camera footage on his laptop. I transferred the files to him, along with my written statement of events. "So you believe the HOA president took your ice scraper, then had her sister return it when she realized what she'd done?" Officer Park asked, looking up from the screen. "That's my theory. I can't prove Brenda took it because I didn't have the camera installed yet, but I can prove Janet returned it, and the footprints from that first morning led directly to Brenda's house." Officer Park nodded slowly. "The hospital ID complicates things. Even though it was returned, the theft of healthcare credentials is taken very seriously. There are federal regulations about this. I didn't know that. Most people don't. But hospitals are considered secure facilities, and credential theft can be prosecuted under identity theft statutes, especially if there's any indication the person intended to use the credentials for unauthorized access. I don't think Brenda intended to use my badge. I think she just took the scraper without looking at it carefully. Maybe, but she still took it, and she took your ID with it. And then instead of returning it openly and apologizing, she had someone else sneak it back in the middle of the night. That shows consciousness of guilt." I hadn't thought about it that way, but Officer Park was right. If Brenda had made an innocent mistake, she could have just knocked on my door and apologized. The sneaking around made it worse. Officer Park closed his laptop and stood up. "I'm going to go have a conversation with Miss Cunningham and her sister. I'll need you to stay available in case I have follow-up questions. Of course. Thank you, officer. After he left, I sat at my kitchen table feeling strange. I hadn't intended to get the police involved, not really, but once I'd mentioned the hospital ID, things had escalated quickly. Part of me felt bad. Brenda was annoying and petty, but I didn't want to ruin her life over an ice scraper. Then I remembered the $200 fine for snow removal I'd properly completed, and the ridiculous mailbox citation, and the way she'd been harassing Frank and probably every other person in the neighborhood. Maybe it was time someone stood up to her. My phone rang. It was Frank. "Dude, there's a cop car in front of Brenda's house. What's going on? Long story. I'll come over in a bit and explain." I grabbed my coat and walked down to Frank's house. He met me at the door with wide eyes. "This is about your ice scraper, isn't it?" he said as I stepped inside. I told him everything, from the theft to the return to the security footage showing Janet Cunningham sneaking around my driveway at 6 in the morning. Frank let out a low whistle. Man, I knew Brenda was petty, but stealing from people, that's a whole different level. I don't think she meant to steal my hospital ID. I think she just grabbed the scraper without thinking. Still theft, though, and you're right to report it. Someone needs to stand up to her. We watched through Frank's front window as Officer Park spent about 30 minutes at Brenda's house. At one point, another police car arrived and a second officer went inside. When they finally left, Brenda stood in her doorway looking like she'd aged 10 years. My phone rang. "Officer Park. Mr. Abbott, I've spoken with Miss Cunningham and her sister." "Miss." Cunningham admits to taking the ice scraper but claims she thought it was trash. She says she didn't see the hospital ID until later, and then she panicked and asked her sister to return it. "So what happens now?" "That's partly up to you. Technically, this is theft, and given that it involved a hospital credential, I could arrest her. However, since the items were returned and there's no evidence of intent to use the credential fraudulently, the prosecutor might not pursue charges. What do you recommend?" Officer Park was quiet for a moment. "Between you and me, I think Miss Cunningham got a good scare today. She understands the seriousness of what she did. If you want to press charges, that's your right. But if you're willing to accept a formal apology and restitution for any damages or inconvenience, that might be a better resolution for everyone." I thought about it. Pressing charges felt like overkill for what was ultimately a stupid mistake. But I also didn't want Brenda to think she could keep getting away with her HOA tyranny. "I'll accept an apology and the removal of all fines she's issued against me," I said, "in writing. I'll convey that to her, and Mr. Abbott. I've also documented several of the complaints your neighbors have about the HOA's practices. If Miss Cunningham continues to abuse her position, there are legal remedies available." After I hung up, Frank looked at me expectantly. "Well," she admitted to taking it. "Officer Park is working on a resolution." "Good. Maybe this will finally get her to back off." I spent the rest of Sunday trying to relax, but my mind kept spinning. Around 4 in the afternoon, there was a knock at my door. I looked through the peephole and saw Brenda standing on my porch, holding a piece of paper. She looked miserable. I opened the door but didn't invite her in. "Harrison," she said, her voice tight, "I owe you an apology." She held out the paper. It was a formal letter, printed on HOA letterhead, stating that she had taken my ice scraper by mistake and sincerely apologized for the error. It also stated that all fines issued against my property were hereby rescinded, and my account was cleared of any violations. "I made a mistake," Brenda said, not quite meeting my eyes. "I thought the scraper was trash. Someone had left it on a car and it was supposed to snow again that night, so I moved it. I didn't realize it was yours, and I didn't see the badge until I got home." So why not just return it the next morning and explain? She finally looked at me, and I could see genuine fear in her eyes. Because I panicked. I knew how it looked, and I knew you'd be angry, and I just wanted to make it go away. So I asked Janet to put it back. That made it worse, Brenda. The sneaking around, the covering up, that's what got the police involved. I know that now. She took a deep breath. I'm sorry, truly. And I'm sorry for the fines, too. I've been under a lot of pressure to increase the HOA budget, and I let it get out of hand. Pressure from who? The board. The management company. Everyone wants more services, but nobody wants to increase dues. So I thought if I just enforced the rules more strictly, we could build up our reserves. I studied her for a moment. She looked tired and defeated, nothing like the imperious HOA president who'd been terrorizing the neighborhood for weeks. You can't shake down homeowners for money, Brenda. That's not what the HOA is for. I know that now. I took the letter from her. Apology accepted. But if you issue another bogus fine to me or anyone else in this neighborhood, I won't be so understanding next time. She nodded quickly. You won't have any more problems from me, I promise. After she left, I read through the letter again. It was everything Officer Park had said I'd get, plus a formal acknowledgement that my property was in full compliance with all HOA regulations. I took a picture of it and sent it to Frank with the message. Got the apology. His response was immediate. Hell yes. Drinks on me when you have a day off. Monday morning, I was back at work, starting another week of 12-hour shifts. The chaos of the emergency department was almost a relief after the stress of dealing with Brenda and the HOA. At least in the ED, problems had clear solutions. Someone came in sick or injured, and we fixed them. There were protocols and procedures, and everyone worked together toward a common goal. During my lunch break, I checked my email and found a message from Premier Community Management. It was from Nancy, the woman I'd spoken with on the phone. Mr. Abbott, we've received notification from the HOA board that your complaint has been resolved and all fines have been rescinded. Your account is clear. Additionally, we wanted to inform you that we've launched an internal review of the HOA's fine issuance practices for Meadowbrook Circle. If you have any additional concerns, please don't hesitate to contact us. I showed the email to my colleague, Marcus Chen, who'd been listening to me complain about HOA drama for the past week. Nice, Marcus said. So it's over, hopefully. I mean, I still have to live in the same neighborhood as Brenda, but at least she knows she can't push me around. Good for you, man. Most people would have just paid the fines. Yeah, well, I'm stubborn, Marcus laughed. I've noticed. The next few weeks passed without incident. I didn't see much of Brenda, and when I did spot her around the neighborhood, she gave me a wide berth. Frank reported that several other neighbors had received letters rescinding their fines as well, and the general mood on Meadowbrook Circle improved dramatically. I started to think the whole mess was behind me. Then, about a month after the ice scraper incident, I got a call from Officer Park. Mr. Abbott, this is Officer Park. Do you have a few minutes to talk? Sure. What's going on? I wanted to give you an update on the HOA situation. After our conversation with Miss Cunningham, we started looking into some of the other complaints we'd received about Meadowbrook Circle HOA. It turns out there were some significant irregularities. What kind of irregularities? Financial ones. The management company's review uncovered discrepancies in the HOA's budget. Money that should have been in the reserve fund wasn't there, and there were several unexplained expenses charged to HOA accounts. I felt my stomach drop. Are you saying Brenda was stealing from the HOA? I'm saying there's an ongoing investigation. We've brought in forensic accountants, and the state's attorney's office is involved. I can't give you specific details, but I wanted you to know because you were the catalyst for all this. If you hadn't reported the ice scraper theft, we never would have started looking into the HOA's practices. After I hung up, I sat in my car outside the hospital for a long time, processing this information. Brenda hadn't just been a petty tyrant issuing bogus fines. She'd apparently been embezzling money from the HOA. The fines had probably been a way to cover up the missing funds or to generate extra cash. Over the next several weeks, the story unfolded in pieces. Frank kept me updated on the neighborhood gossip, and occasionally I'd see news reports online. The investigation revealed that Brenda had been siphoning money from the HOA for nearly 3 years, using it to pay for personal expenses ranging from luxury vacations to home renovations. Her sister Janet had been complicit, using her position as treasurer to help hide the theft. The total amount missing was close to $60,000. Brenda and Janet were both arrested and charged with embezzlement, theft, and fraud. Doug Cunningham, the secretary and Brenda's husband's cousin, was also implicated, though to a lesser degree. He'd apparently known about some of the irregularities, but had looked the other way. The HOA was thrown into chaos. Premier Community Management took over direct control of operations, while a new board was elected. Special assessments were discussed to cover the missing funds, though eventually the HOA's insurance policy covered most of the loss. I felt strange about the whole thing. On one hand, I was glad that Brenda's corruption had been exposed. She'd been stealing from everyone in the neighborhood, and she deserved to face consequences. On the other hand, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd set off a domino effect that had destroyed multiple lives. Frank tried to reassure me one evening when we were having beers in his garage. "You didn't do anything wrong," he said. "Brenda made her choices. You just reported a theft, which is exactly what you should have done. Everything else was her fault. I know. It's just weird to think that if I hadn't left my ice scraper on my windshield that night, none of this would have happened. Or Brenda would have kept stealing until she got caught some other way. Either way, it's not on you." The legal proceedings dragged on for months. Brenda and Janet both eventually pleaded guilty to reduced charges in exchange for agreeing to pay restitution. Brenda got 2 years of probation and 6 months of home detention, plus a felony record. Janet got a similar sentence. Doug got off with a fine and community service, since his role had been more passive. The Cunninghams put their house up for sale immediately after the sentencing. Brenda couldn't face the neighbors anymore, and honestly, I didn't blame her. The shame of being exposed as a thief in a community you'd once lorded over had to be crushing. A young couple with 2 kids bought the house in early summer. They were friendly and normal, and they definitely had no interest in being on the HOA board. The new board, elected in April, was a group of level-headed homeowners who actually cared about the community rather than power or control. They immediately revised the bylaws to add more oversight and transparency, implemented term limits for board positions, and ended the practice of family members serving on the board together. The fines stopped almost entirely. The new board only issued violations for genuine problems, and even then, they worked with homeowners to resolve issues rather than immediately imposing penalties. Meadowbrook Circle became a genuinely pleasant place to live. As for me, I kept working at Northwestern Medicine, picking up shifts and living my life. The whole HOA drama became a story I told at parties, the time I accidentally brought down a corrupt HOA president by leaving my ice scraper on my windshield. One Saturday morning in June, about 4 months after Brenda's sentencing, I was washing my car in the driveway when a woman I didn't recognize walked up. She was in her 50s, well-dressed and carrying a briefcase. Harrison Abbott, she asked. That's me. My name is Linda Shaw. I'm an attorney representing a group of HOA members from various communities in Illinois. We're working on legislation to reform HOA governance and increase accountability. I heard about what happened here in Meadowbrook Circle, and I was hoping you might be willing to speak with me about your experience. I invited her inside and made coffee while she explained the project. Apparently, HOA corruption and abuse were much more common than I'd realized. Linda's organization was collecting stories and pushing for state-level reforms that would make it harder for HOA boards to act without oversight. Your case is interesting because it shows how small acts of corruption can lead to uncovering bigger problems, Linda said. If you hadn't reported the theft of your ice scraper, Brenda Cunningham might have continued embezzling for years. I've thought about that, I admitted. It's surreal to think about how everything connected. Would you be willing to testify at a legislative hearing? We're trying to get a bill introduced next session, and personal stories from homeowners are powerful. I agreed, figuring that if my experience could help prevent other people from dealing with corrupt HOAs, it was worth the time and effort. The hearing took place in Springfield in late September. I took a day off work and drove down to the state capitol, where I joined about a dozen other homeowners with their own HOA horror stories. Some were worse than mine. Tales of foreclosures over minor violations, boards that operated like criminal enterprises, and elderly homeowners being harassed out of their properties. I gave my testimony in front of a legislative committee, walking them through the ice scraper theft, the discovery of the hospital ID, and how that single incident had led to uncovering tens of thousands of dollars in embezzlement. The committee members asked thoughtful questions, and several of them seemed genuinely outraged by what they were hearing. The bill didn't pass that session, but Linda told me it was a strong start. These things took time, but every hearing and every story helped build momentum for change. On the drive back to Naperville, I thought about how much had changed in less than a year. I'd gone from being a relatively anonymous resident of Meadowbrook Circle to someone who'd exposed corruption, testified before the state legislature, and become part of a movement for HOA reform. All because I'd been too tired to bring my ice scraper inside one night. When I got home, there was a package waiting on my porch. I picked it up and checked the label. It was from Frank Morrison. Inside was a brand new ice scraper, top of the line with an extendable handle and a built-in brush. There was also a note, for the man who started a revolution with a piece of plastic. This one's on me. Just don't leave it on your windshield. Frank. I laughed and carried the package inside, adding it to the collection of random gifts and mementos people had given me over the past few months. The story of the ice scraper had become legendary in Meadowbrook Circle, and apparently, people thought it was hilarious to give me ice scraper-related gifts. I had 3 ice scrapers now, plus a coffee mug with a picture of an ice scraper on it, a T-shirt that said Ice Scraper Vigilante, and a custom-made Christmas ornament in the shape of, you guessed it, an ice scraper. It was ridiculous and kind of wonderful. That evening, I was making dinner when my doorbell rang. I opened it to find the young couple who'd bought Brenda's house, Mark and Kelly Fitzgerald, standing on my porch with their 2 kids. "Hi, Harrison," Kelly said. "We wanted to invite you to a neighborhood barbecue we're hosting next Saturday. Nothing fancy, just burgers and hot dogs, but we're trying to meet everyone." "That sounds great. I'll be there." "Perfect. Oh, and we heard about what happened with the previous owners. Just want to say thank you for standing up to that nonsense. This seems like a really nice neighborhood now." "It is," I said, and I meant it. The barbecue the following Saturday was exactly what Meadowbrook Circle needed. About 20 neighbors showed up, including Frank, the new HOA board president Karen Wellington, and several families I'd only waved to before. Kids ran around the Fitzgeralds' backyard while adults chatted over beer and grilled food. Karen Wellington approached me at one point, holding a plate of potato salad. "Harrison, I wanted to personally thank you for everything you did," she said. "I know it probably didn't feel like a big deal at the time, but you really did change this community for the better. I just reported a theft. Everything else kind of snowballed from there. Maybe, but you didn't back down when Brenda tried to bully you. A lot of people would have just paid the fines and moved on. You fought back, and that made all the difference." As I drove to work the following Monday, I reflected on how truth sometimes emerged from the most unlikely places. A stolen ice scraper had revealed corruption. A hospital ID badge had been the key to everything. And a neighborhood that had been quietly suffering under a tyrant's rule had been freed because one person decided not to let it slide. I thought about all the little decisions that had led to this outcome. If I hadn't been too tired to bring my scraper inside that night, if I hadn't left my old hospital badge attached to it, if I hadn't installed the security camera, if I hadn't called the police, any one of those decisions could have changed everything, but they hadn't changed. They'd happened exactly as they were supposed to, and now Meadowbrook Circle was a better place because of it. At work that day, Marcus asked how the barbecue had gone. It was great. Normal neighborhood stuff, you know. Kids playing, people chatting, no one threatening to fine anyone for having their trash cans visible for 31 minutes instead of 30. Marcus laughed. "Living the dream." "You know what? Yeah, I kind of am." The months rolled on into fall and then winter again. When the first snow fell in late November, I made sure to shovel my driveway and walkway immediately. Not because I was worried about getting fined, but because it was the right thing to do. The new HOA board didn't need to remind people to maintain their properties. Most of us did it automatically because we cared about the neighborhood. On a particularly cold morning in January, almost exactly a year after the ice scraper incident, I found myself standing in my driveway, scraping ice off my windshield with the fancy new scraper Frank had given me. The sun was just starting to rise, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange, and the neighborhood was quiet except for the scraping sound and the distant rumble of a snowplow. I thought about Brenda Cunningham, wherever she was now. I hoped she'd learned something from the experience, though I suspected she probably just felt like a victim of circumstances. Some people never took responsibility for their actions. I thought about Janet and Doug too, caught up in Brenda's schemes. I wondered if they'd known from the beginning or if they'd been slowly drawn in over time. Either way, they'd made their choices and faced the consequences. My phone buzzed with a text from the hospital. They were short-staffed in the ED and asking if I could come in early. I looked at the time. I could probably make it if I left in the next 10 minutes. I texted back that I was on my way, tossed my ice scraper into the back seat where it belonged, and climbed into my car. The engine started smoothly, and I backed out of my driveway onto Meadowbrook Circle. As I drove past the house that used to be Brenda's, I could see lights on inside and the Fitzgeralds' minivan in the driveway, probably Kelly getting ready to take the kids to school. A dog barked somewhere nearby. A neighbor waved as I passed. It was just another morning in a normal neighborhood, and that was exactly how it should be at the hospital. The day unfolded with its usual organized chaos. Car accident victims, a construction worker with a nail through his hand, an elderly woman with chest pain, a kid with a possible broken arm from falling off a skateboard. Each patient got my full attention and the best care I could provide. This was what I'd trained for, what I was good at. During my lunch break, I checked my phone and found an email from Linda Shaw. The HOA reform bill was being reintroduced in the new legislative session, with some modifications based on feedback from the last hearing. She was optimistic about its chances this time. I replied with encouragement and a promise to testify again if needed. As I ate my sandwich in the break room, one of the ED physicians, Dr. Sarah Martinez, sat down across from me. "You're that guy, aren't you?" she said. "I'm going to need more context." "The ice scraper guy. The one who brought down that corrupt HOA. I heard about it from someone who lives in Naperville." I sighed. "Yeah, that's me. That's pretty cool, actually. My friend lives in an HOA that sounds awful. She's been thinking about selling her house just to get away from it. She should look into her state's HOA laws. There might be remedies available. And if not, she should contact Linda Shaw's organization. They're working on reforms." I gave her Linda's contact information, and Dr. Martinez promised to pass it along to her friend. It was strange how the ice scraper incident kept rippling outward, touching people I'd never met and probably never would. But if it helped even one person stand up to an abusive HOA, then all the stress and drama had been worth it. The shift ended at 7:30 and I drove home through the dark winter evening. The roads were clear and traffic was light. I pulled into my driveway and sat in my car for a moment, looking at my house. It was small and simple, but it was mine. I'd worked hard for it, and I'd fought to protect it. Inside, I heated up some leftover chili and settled onto the couch to watch a basketball game. The Chicago Bulls were playing the Boston Celtics, and I had money on the Bulls in my fantasy league. It was a close game, back and forth, neither team able to pull away. Halfway through the third quarter, my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. "Is this Harrison Abbott?" a man's voice asked. "Speaking." "Mr. Abbott, my name is Richard Chen. I'm a producer for a podcast called Neighborhood Justice. We cover stories about HOA conflicts and community issues. I came across your story and would love to interview you for an episode. Would you be interested?" I hesitated. Part of me wanted to leave the whole thing in the past. But another part, the part that had testified in Springfield and given Linda Shaw's information to Dr. Martinez's friend, knew that sharing the story could help other people. "Sure," I said. "I can do that." We scheduled the interview for the following week, and Richard promised to send me some questions in advance so I could prepare. After we hung up, I went back to watching the game, but my mind was elsewhere. The ice scraper incident had become bigger than just me and Brenda. It had become a symbol of something, proof that ordinary people could stand up to petty tyranny and win. That was a responsibility I hadn't asked for, but one I was willing to accept. The Bulls won in overtime, and I went to bed feeling satisfied. The podcast interview happened via video call the following Wednesday. Richard was professional and well prepared, asking thoughtful questions about the timeline of events, my decision to involve the police, and how the discovery of the embezzlement had affected the neighborhood. "What would you say to someone who's dealing with an abusive HOA?" Richard asked near the end of the interview. I thought about it for a moment. "Document everything. Take pictures, save emails, record conversations if it's legal in your state. Know your rights and read your HOA bylaws thoroughly. And don't be afraid to push back when something isn't right. Most bullies, whether they're individuals or organizations, back down when someone stands up to them. And if they don't back down, then you escalate. File complaints with your HOA management company. Contact your state's regulatory agencies. Talk to a lawyer. And if all else fails, organize with your neighbors. There's strength in numbers. The podcast episode aired 2 weeks later. I listened to it on my drive to work, and Richard had done a good job editing it into a compelling narrative. He'd also interviewed Linda Shaw, a legal expert on HOA law, providing context for my story. Within a few days, the episode had thousands of downloads. People were leaving comments on the podcast's website and social media, sharing their own HOA horror stories. Some were reaching out to Linda's organization. Others were simply expressing solidarity. I got messages from friends and coworkers who'd heard the podcast. Even my parents called from Arizona, where they'd retired the previous year. "We're proud of you," my mom said. "You did the right thing, even when it wasn't easy." "Thanks, Mom. It turned out to be bigger than I expected." The important things usually are. As winter turned to spring, life in Meadowbrook Circle continued its peaceful routine. The HOA board functioned smoothly, addressing issues fairly and transparently. People actually wanted to serve on committees now, knowing they could make a real difference without fear of retaliation. Frank Morrison was elected to the board in March, and he immediately started working on improving the neighborhood's common areas. By April, there were new benches at the playground and fresh mulch in all the flower beds. I helped with a neighborhood cleanup day in May, spending a Saturday picking up litter and trimming overgrown bushes along the walking paths. It was good to work alongside my neighbors, to be part of something positive. The ice scraper that had started it all sat in my garage now, retired from active duty. I'd kept the one Frank gave me in my car, and the original had become a sort of trophy, a reminder of how small actions could have big consequences. In June, Linda Shaw called to tell me the HOA reform bill had passed the Illinois legislature and was headed to the governor's desk for signature. "We did it," she said, her voice filled with excitement. "This is going to protect thousands of homeowners from the kind of abuse you experienced." "That's amazing. What does the bill do exactly?" She walked me through the key provisions. Mandatory financial audits for HOAs, limits on fines and fee increases, requirements for transparent budgeting, protections against arbitrary rule enforcement, and easier paths for homeowners to challenge board decisions. "Your testimony made a real difference," Linda said. "The legislators remembered your story, and it helped them understand why these reforms were necessary." After we hung up, I sat at my kitchen table feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time: pride. Not the shallow pride of personal achievement, but the deeper satisfaction of having contributed to something meaningful. Because of a stolen ice scraper and a willingness to stand up for what was right, life would be better for countless people I'd never meet. The governor signed the bill in early July, and there was a small ceremony that Linda invited me to attend. I took a personal day and drove to Springfield, where I shook hands with legislators and activists and other homeowners who'd fought their own battles against corrupt HOAs. A reporter from the Chicago Tribune interviewed me, asking about the ice scraper incident and how it had led to this moment. The story ran a few days later with the headline, "From Ice Scraper to Reform: How One Nurse's Fight Changed Illinois HOA Law." My phone exploded with messages. Friends from college I hadn't talked to in years, distant relatives, former coworkers. Everyone wanted to congratulate me or share their own HOA stories. It was overwhelming but also kind of wonderful. At work, the hospital administration got wind of the story and asked if they could feature me in their employee newsletter. I agreed, and the article focused on how healthcare workers needed to be advocates not just for their patients, but for their communities as well. Dr. Martinez's friend, the one with the terrible HOA, reached out to thank me. She'd contacted Linda's organization, gotten legal advice, and successfully challenged her HOA board's discriminatory practices. Her neighborhood was now in the process of electing a new board. "You gave me the courage to fight back," she wrote in her email. "Thank you. These moments, these small victories, they added up to something bigger. A movement, maybe, or at least a shift in how people thought about HOAs and community governance." Summer rolled on, hot and humid like Illinois summers always were. I took a week of vacation in August and visited my parents in Arizona. They wanted to hear every detail of the past year and a half, and I found myself telling the story over and over, refining it with each retelling until it had the polish of a well-rehearsed speech. My dad, who'd always been quiet and reserved, said something that stuck with me. "You know, most people go through life trying not to make waves. They see something wrong and they look the other way because getting involved is too much trouble. But you didn't do that. You made waves and the waves turned into something good. That takes courage." I didn't feel courageous. I just felt annoyed about the fines and the stolen scraper. Courage isn't about feeling brave. It's about doing the right thing even when it's uncomfortable. When I returned to Naperville, I found the neighborhood in the midst of planning the annual block party. It was scheduled for the last Saturday in August, and everyone was excited about it. The new HOA board had approved a generous budget for food and entertainment, a stark contrast to previous years when Brenda had insisted on keeping costs minimal. I volunteered to help with setup, and on the day of the party, I arrived early to help string lights and set up tables. The weather was perfect, sunny and warm with a gentle breeze. People started arriving around noon, bringing dishes to share and their appetites for community. Karen Wellington, the HOA board president, gave a short speech thanking everyone for making Meadowbrook Circle a special place. She didn't mention Brenda or the embezzlement directly, but everyone knew what she was referring to when she talked about moving forward and learning from the past. Then, to my surprise, she called me up to the front. "I want to take a moment to recognize Harrison Abbott," she said. "Many of you know his story, but for those who don't, Harrison's willingness to stand up for what was right led to significant positive changes in our community. He showed us that one person can make a difference, and for that, we're grateful." People applauded, and I felt my face get hot. I wasn't good with public recognition, but I appreciated the sentiment. I said a few words about how great the neighborhood had become and how proud I was to live here, then quickly stepped back into the crowd. Frank found me a few minutes later and handed me a beer. "You're famous now," he said with a grin. "I'm really not." "Dude, you were on a podcast in the newspaper and you helped pass a state law. That's pretty famous." "It's weird. I didn't set out to do any of that. I just wanted my ice scraper back. And that's what makes it perfect. You weren't looking for attention or trying to be a hero. You just did what was right, and everything else followed." The block party lasted until dark, with kids playing games and adults chatting in small groups. I talked to neighbors I'd only known in passing, learned about their jobs and families and dreams. It felt like what a community should feel like: connected, supportive, alive. As I walked home that night, pleasantly tired and full of good food, I thought about the journey that had brought me to this point. It had started with such a small thing, an ice scraper left on a windshield. But that small thing had been the first thread in a tapestry of events that had reshaped an entire community and contributed to legislative change that would affect thousands of people. Inside my house, I poured myself a glass of water and stood at my kitchen window, looking out at the quiet street. Meadowbrook Circle was dark except for the streetlights and the occasional glow from a window. It looked peaceful. It looked like home. My hospital ID badge sat on the counter where I'd left it after my last shift. I picked it up, running my thumb over the laminated surface. This little piece of plastic, along with an ice scraper, had been the catalyst for everything. I thought about Brenda Cunningham one last time, wondering if she ever thought about how differently things could have gone. If she just returned the scraper the next morning with an apology, none of this would have happened. The embezzlement would have continued undetected, the neighborhood would have remained under her thumb, and the reform bill would never have been written. But she hadn't. She'd panicked and tried to cover her tracks, and that decision had unraveled everything. There was a lesson in that, I thought. The cover-up is often worse than the crime. If you make a mistake, own it. Apologize, make it right, and move forward. Because trying to hide it almost always makes things worse. I finished my water and headed to bed, setting my alarm for the next day's early shift. Tomorrow would bring new patience, new challenges, new opportunities to make a difference in small ways. And that was enough. As I drifted off to sleep, I smiled, thinking about the absurdity of it all. Who would have thought that an ice scraper could change so much? But then again, maybe that was the point. Maybe the world didn't change through grand gestures and dramatic moments. Maybe it changed through 1,000 small actions, ordinary people standing up for what was right, refusing to be pushed around, insisting that things could be better. An ice scraper here, a testimony there, a reform bill passed into law. Each piece small on its own, but together they added up to real, lasting change. And it had all started on a freezing February morning when I'd been too tired to bring my ice scraper inside. Life was funny that way.